She said I was dangerous. I said she was curious. And just like that, everything changed. The cafe smelled of warm espresso and fresh pastries, a gentle hum of conversation swirling around me. I had come here more out of habit than expectation, seeking a quiet corner to read and let the world pass by. That's when I saw her, standing by the large window, sunlight streaming across her hair in a way that made every ordinary detail of her seem extraordinary. She wasn't loud or showy, but there was a presence about her that drew attention without demanding it. The kind of presence that makes you notice her before you even realize why. She was older than me, well into her 40s, but there was a grace about her that wasn't about age or youth. It was in the subtle sway of her posture, the poised tilt of her head, and the way she surveyed the room with quiet confidence. Yet behind that composed exterior, I sensed something softer, something unspoken, a vulnerability she carried like a secret. And for reasons I couldn't immediately name, I was drawn in. She reached for a book on the shelf nearby, her fingers brushing the spine lightly. I noticed the deliberate care in the gesture. It was as if even the simplest movement carried meaning. My eyes flicked to hers, and for a heartbeat, our gazes locked. She smiled then, a small, knowing smile, almost a challenge, almost an invitation. My chest tightened, the kind of subtle awareness that lets you know someone matters before a single word is spoken. I moved closer under the pretense of browsing the same shelf. Her hand brushed mine briefly as we both reached for the same novel. It was accidental, or perhaps not, but the electricity of that fleeting contact lingered longer than it should have. I felt a pulse of warmth, a jolt that made me acutely aware of every detail, the soft curve of her wrist, the delicate scent of her perfume that mixed with the rich aroma of coffee, the quiet confidence in her stance even as her fingers lingered on the book. She looked at me then, and without preamble, said, almost teasingly, "You're dangerous." Her words startled me, though I couldn't tell if it was a warning, an observation, or a playful challenge. There was a weight behind them, a depth I couldn't ignore. I wanted to respond with something equally layered, something that might keep the spark alive. So I let a half-smile curve my lips and said softly, "And you're curious?" The effect was instantaneous. Her eyes widened fractionally, and she tilted her head, studying me as if trying to decide whether I was worth the gamble. The air between us shifted, charged with something that neither of us could name yet. It wasn't just attraction, it was a mixture of curiosity, caution, and the thrill of the unknown. For the next few moments, we lingered there, caught in the quiet dance of observation. She returned to the book, flipping the pages with graceful fingers, and I took a step back, pretending to browse nearby titles. Yet every so often, our eyes met, and a wordless conversation passed between us, glances that lingered longer than necessary, a subtle tilt of her head, a fleeting smile that spoke volumes. I noticed the little details, the soft rustle of her scarf as she shifted, the faint glimmer of sunlight on her hair, the way she tapped the book lightly when deep in thought. It was mesmerizing because she was ordinary and extraordinary all at once. I could sense the careful balance she maintained, someone who had lived, who had seen the world, who knew herself, yet still carried an openness that invited connection. And I realized, in that quiet moment, that the story wasn't about danger or curiosity. It was about the delicate tension between them. The possibility of something unspoken, of a connection that could grow slowly, deliberately, with layers of understanding and emotion. It was the kind of spark that doesn't demand fireworks. It simply lingers, quietly insistive, until you can't ignore it. As I left the cafe that morning, the memory of her smile, the brush of her hand, and the charged words hung in my mind. She was dangerous, yes, but in a way that was thrilling, intriguing, irresistible. And I, for my part, was already caught in her orbit, curious about where this would go, about what secrets and emotions lay beneath the calm surface she presented. It was just the beginning. A first spark. But in that moment, it felt as if the world had narrowed to a single point, her presence, and the subtle promise of what might come. After that first encounter, I couldn't stop thinking about her, the way she moved, the tilt of her head when she smiled, and that faint trace of vulnerability hidden behind her confidence. The next time I saw her, it felt deliberate, almost faded. She was sitting at a corner table in the same cafe, a notebook open in front of her. Her pen hovered, paused in midair, as though she had been waiting for me to appear. I approached cautiously, aware that the thrill of curiosity could quickly tip into recklessness. She looked up when I neared, and her eyes sparkled, that subtle glint that made my chest tighten. "Back again," she said, voice soft but amused, as if she were testing me. "You do enjoy danger, don't you?" I smiled, leaning slightly on the table without overstepping. "Only when it's worth it," I replied. "Curiosity can be just as dangerous, though." "Aren't you curious?" Her laugh was quiet but rich, the kind that lingers in your memory long after it's gone. She leaned back, studying me as if she were weighing my words, analyzing the layers beneath them. There was a mental dance happening between us, words exchanged like delicate sparring, each statement teasing, revealing, yet withholding. I realized quickly that she was as sharp as she was graceful, someone who could hold her ground and still invite connection. The cafe hummed around us, but in that corner, the world seemed to shrink. I noticed the small details, the way her fingers tapped lightly on the notebook when she was thinking, the slight tilt of her wrist when she reached for her coffee, the way sunlight glinted off her hair in uneven strands. Each gesture was unassuming, yet it drew my attention in ways I hadn't expected. We talked about trivial things at first, books, music, the weather, but each topic carried weight, a hidden significance. I found myself watching how her eyes lit up when she talked about something she loved, the subtle tension in her shoulders when she hesitated. Every pause, every shift of her hand spoke volumes. And I realized she was watching me just as closely, noting the small quirks, the way I listened, the faint way my lips curved when I laughed. Then, without warning, she leaned forward slightly, just enough that our shoulders brushed. A simple, almost accidental contact, yet it felt electric. I swallowed the sudden awareness of her proximity, and let my gaze linger, tracing the delicate line of her profile. She noticed and didn't pull away, letting the space between us carry its own weight. "You're still dangerous," she said softly, almost a whisper, her eyes fixed on mine. There was a hint of a challenge in her tone, the kind that teases without daring you to respond too easily. "And you're still curious," I countered, the words slipping out naturally. Her smile deepened, and she shook her head slightly, a gesture full of playful disbelief. "Dangerous and curious, quite the combination," she said, though I could tell she was thinking more about the man standing in front of her than the abstract concept. We lingered there, the conversation unfolding with layers of subtle tension. Each comment, each glance, each small touch was a step in a slow, deliberate dance. There was no rush, no need for fireworks, just the steady pull of two people drawn toward each other, exploring the limits of their connection without fully naming it. I noticed how she unconsciously mirrored my movements at times, leaning forward when I did, tilting her head when I spoke. It was hypnotic, the way two people could synchronize in such understated ways, revealing more about themselves than words ever could. And I realized that beneath her composed exterior, there was a desire to explore, to test the boundaries of this budding connection. The hours passed almost unnoticed. The cafe lights shifted with the setting sun, painting her features in warm golds and soft shadows. Every so often, our hands brushed again, small, fleeting touches that seemed deliberate yet innocent. The intensity wasn't in any single gesture, it was in the accumulation, the careful layering of small moments that spoke louder than any confession could. As I finally stood to leave, she closed her notebook slowly, her eyes meeting mine with a lingering glance that said more than words ever could. The promise of continuation hung between us, quiet yet undeniable. Dangerous and curious, we had begun a dance of words, and I already knew it was only the beginning. The rain started softly, tapping against the cafe window like a gentle drumbeat, drawing the world inward and leaving just the two of us in a bubble of quiet intimacy. We had lingered longer than either of us had planned, talking about books, music, and fragments of our past lives that we rarely shared with anyone. The hum of the cafe faded into background noise, replaced by the rhythm of our voices and the occasional splash of raindrops hitting the pavement outside. We stepped out together, sharing a single umbrella. It was too small to cover both of us completely, so our shoulders brushed repeatedly, accidental yet electric. The warmth of her presence was undeniable, and the slight dampness of her coat carried the fresh scent of rain and something uniquely hers, soft, familiar, and yet impossible to define. Every time our arms touched, even briefly, it sent a subtle ripple through me, a reminder of how close we were to crossing a line neither of us had named yet. We found a bench under a canopy, the rain falling around us in shimmering sheets. She sat gracefully, crossing her legs, but leaving just enough space between us that it felt intentional, deliberate. Yet the tension in the air was palpable. I wanted to reach for her hand, to bridge that small distance, but hesitated, aware of the delicate balance we were maintaining. There was vulnerability in her presence, an openness that whispered of trust, yet there was also caution. "You always make ordinary things feel dangerous," she said softly, almost as if speaking aloud her thoughts would make them real. She looked down at her hands, tracing patterns on her notebook, and I noticed the small tremble in her fingers, not of fear, but of emotion restrained. I leaned slightly closer, careful not to crowd her, letting my shoulder brush hers just enough to elicit a reaction. She didn't move away. Instead, her eyes flicked to mine, wide and unguarded, and I felt that same quiet pull that had drawn me to her from the beginning. It was a connection that transcended words, an understanding that we were both aware of the unspoken tension simmering between us. "I think curiosity is more dangerous than anything else," I said, voice low, almost a whisper against the patter of rain. "It makes you take risks you wouldn't normally consider." Her lips curved into a small, thoughtful smile, and she let out a breath that seemed to release some invisible tension. "Then I guess I'm taking a lot of risks right now," she admitted, eyes meeting mine with a mixture of playfulness and vulnerability. It was rare to see her drop the confident mask entirely, even if only for a fleeting moment. For a few minutes neither of us spoke. The rain was a constant, comforting presence, a soft percussion that made the world feel smaller, as if we were suspended in time. I noticed the way her hair fell across her cheek, slightly damp from the rain, and I longed to tuck it behind her ear. My fingers itched to touch her hand, but I waited, letting the moment breathe. Then, almost imperceptibly, she leaned slightly closer, enough that our shoulders touched more firmly, and the warmth of her presence seeped into me. Her proximity was intoxicating, the air between us charged with something neither of us had fully admitted. I could feel her heartbeat in the subtle rise and fall of her chest, the faint warmth radiating from her, as she shifted toward me. I spoke quietly, careful not to break the fragile spell. "It's okay, you don't have to pretend with me." Her gaze softened, vulnerability evident for just a moment. She let a small sigh escape, and I reached out instinctively, brushing my fingers against the back of her hand. She didn't pull away. Instead, she allowed the touch, subtle and fleeting, to linger for a heartbeat longer than necessary. That tiny contact, so innocent, so understated, felt monumental. It said more than words could ever convey: trust, curiosity, and the quiet acknowledgement of attraction. The rain continued to fall around us, each drop a reminder that the world existed beyond this moment, yet we were suspended, caught in a private space where vulnerability and desire intertwined. She shifted slightly closer, and for a brief second, our hands hovered near one another, almost touching, almost claiming the space between us. And in that quiet intimacy, I realized that this was more than mere attraction. It was a connection that required patience, a slow and deliberate discovery of each other's worlds. Dangerous, perhaps, but irresistible. Curious, yes, but carefully so. As we finally rose to leave, the bench still wet beneath us, there was a shared understanding. Something was beginning to bloom, fragile and deliberate, between a dangerous man and a curious woman. And neither of us wanted to stop it. The days after our rain-soaked encounter felt unusually heavy, charged with a tension I couldn't quite name. I found myself replaying every word, every glance, every brush of her hand. Even the simplest gestures, like the tilt of her head when she laughed, lingered in my mind, refusing to leave. And yet, alongside the thrill, There was hesitation. The awareness of our age difference, of the life experiences between us, made me second-guess every thought, every impulse. She was on my mind constantly, but it wasn't just attraction, it was a tug-of-war between curiosity and caution. I admired her confidence, the way she carried herself with such effortless grace, yet I also sensed her own internal conflicts. There was a strength there, yes, but also moments where vulnerability peeked through, moments that made me want to reach out and offer reassurance. And I hesitated, knowing that even the smallest misstep could shatter the fragile connection we were building. We met again at a quiet park, where the air smelled faintly of autumn leaves and damp earth. The setting felt private, safe, yet alive with possibility. She was already there, sitting on the edge of a bench, her fingers idly tracing patterns on the wood. She looked up when I approached, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips, but I noticed a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She wasn't just testing me, she was testing herself, weighing the risk of letting someone so close. We walked together along the gravel path, side by side but not touching, a deliberate gap that spoke volumes. Every step was measured, every glance intentional. I wanted to bridge the distance, to let my hand brush against hers, to linger in the warmth of her shoulder, but fear held me back. Not fear of rejection, but fear of rushing something delicate, something that deserved time to grow. I keep wondering, she said softly, if curiosity always leads to trouble. Her words hung between us like a delicate thread, and I realized she wasn't talking about abstract ideas, she was talking about us. The connection we shared, subtle yet undeniable, carried a danger neither of us wanted to fully name. Sometimes it does, I admitted. But sometimes it leads to something worth the risk. She laughed lightly, the sound carrying a mix of amusement and nervousness. Worth the risk, she repeated, almost questioning herself. Then she paused, looking away at the trees swaying in the wind, the sunlight dappled through golden leaves. I don't know if I'm ready to find out. Her hesitation mirrored my own internal struggle. I wanted to tell her that everything I felt was genuine, that the pull between us wasn't reckless or fleeting. But words were inadequate. Instead, I let silence fill the space, allowing our presence to communicate what speech could not. I noticed the subtle tension in her posture, the way she fidgeted with her scarf, the soft bite of her lower lip, the quick glance to see if I would step closer or give her space. I considered turning away, walking a safer path of restraint, but something held me there, an invisible thread, pulling me toward her. And yet, every fiber of caution whispered, take it slow, respect the distance, don't force what needs to grow naturally. It was a delicate balance, the kind of tension that made every glance, every brush of clothing, every shared laugh feel magnified. At one point, she shifted slightly closer, just enough that our shoulders brushed. I felt the warmth radiating from her and the subtle heartbeat in her side, a quiet rhythm I had memorized without trying. I wanted to reach for her hand, to let my fingers linger over hers, but I hesitated. Instead, I let my arm brush against hers, a soft, almost accidental contact. She didn't move away. The acknowledgement in her eyes was enough, a silent permission, a gentle invitation without words. We continued walking in companionable silence, both of us acutely aware of the unspoken tension. Every step, every shift of weight, every small smile or glance carried meaning. The world around us, the crunch of leaves, the rustle of branches, the distant calls of birds, seemed to fade, leaving just a fragile, intimate connection between a dangerous man and a curious woman. By the time we parted, lingering at the park gate, there was a quiet understanding between us. Neither of us had crossed any lines, but both of us had felt the pull, the magnetic tension that made stepping away almost painful. She gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod, a wordless acknowledgement that curiosity and danger could coexist, if we were patient enough to let it unfold. Walking away, I realized that the struggle wasn't just external, it was internal. Desire, hesitation, fear, and longing were tangled together, creating a slow-burning fire that neither of us could ignore. And as I glanced back, I caught her watching me, eyes soft and reflective, a silent promise of the complicated, irresistible journey that was only just beginning. The evening was quiet, almost unbearably still, as though the world had paused just for us. We found ourselves in her apartment, a softly lit space filled with the warmth of lamps and the faint aroma of vanilla candles. The city outside buzzed faintly, but in this room, everything felt suspended. The air between us was heavy with unspoken words, each glance carrying the weight of everything we had felt but never admitted. We sat across from each other, a small table separating us. Wine glasses caught the dim light, reflecting tiny flickers that danced like the tension in the room. She looked at me, eyes steady yet vulnerable, and I felt my chest tighten in response. We had walked this slow, careful path together, testing boundaries, savoring stolen moments of closeness, but now the stakes felt higher. The attraction, the curiosity, the emotional connection, it all pressed against the walls of restraint we had built. "You're still dangerous," she said softly, the words a familiar echo but somehow heavier this time. There was no teasing in her voice, no playful challenge. Just a quiet acknowledgement of the risk inherent in our connection. "And you're still curious," I replied, leaning slightly forward, my voice low and steady. I wanted her to feel the sincerity behind the words, to understand that the tension we shared wasn't recklessness. It was something real, something worth exploring carefully. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. I noticed the subtle tremor in her hand as she set down her glass, the way her shoulders tensed then relaxed, the faint quiver in her lips as she debated what to say next. It was rare to see her unguarded, and it made me ache to reach out, to bridge the physical and emotional distance between us. The first real contact came unexpectedly. She reached for her pen on the table, and our hands brushed. It was fleeting, almost incidental, but electric. I held my breath, aware of the warmth that radiated from her skin, the subtle pulse I could feel through that simple touch. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let her fingers linger just slightly, a silent acknowledgement that she too was feeling the pull, the dangerous allure of curiosity intertwined with desire. We began to speak then, not about abstract things, not about the cautious banter of previous meetings, but about ourselves. About fears, regrets, and choices we had made. Her voice softened as she admitted the hesitation she had felt, the questions she hadn't dared to ask herself. I responded honestly, sharing the struggles I carried, the doubts about crossing a line, the simultaneous thrill and terror of feeling drawn to her. It was vulnerable, almost painfully so. Each confession brought us closer in ways neither words nor touches alone could convey. And then, in a moment of quiet courage, she leaned slightly forward, just enough that our knees brushed. The contact sent a jolt through me, a reminder that danger and curiosity weren't just abstract concepts anymore. They were real, embodied in the proximity of her presence. I wanted to close the gap, to let my hand find hers, to feel the warmth and reassurance of physical connection. Yet I hesitated, aware that every move carried meaning, that every gesture could either deepen trust or shatter the fragile equilibrium. She mirrored my hesitation, the subtle rise and fall of her chest betraying the storm of emotion beneath her calm exterior. Time seemed to stretch, each second dense with anticipation. Our conversation drifted between silence and words, laughter and sighs, honesty and playful deflection. She brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, and I caught the gesture, the intimacy of it making my pulse quicken. We were aware of the electricity between us, yet neither of us rushed, savoring the tension, letting it build naturally, deliberately. Finally, the emotional dam broke, not with a grand gesture, but with a quiet acknowledgement. Her hand hovered near mine, the warmth radiating from her fingers palpable. I reached slowly, letting my fingertips brush hers. She didn't pull away. Instead, she allowed the contact to linger, subtle yet monumental, a silent affirmation of trust, curiosity, and desire intertwined. The room seemed to shrink around us, filled only with the weight of shared emotions, the thrill of proximity, and the acknowledgement that something profound was happening. Dangerous and curious, cautious and daring, we existed in a delicate balance of restraint and surrender. And for the first time, it felt like we were both willing to risk the uncertainty, to step closer, to embrace the connection we had been circling from the very beginning. As we sat there, hands almost touching, breaths mingling in the small space, it became clear this was the emotional climax. The moment when hesitation and desire collided, when curiosity met danger, when vulnerability created intimacy. And in that suspended, quiet, electric moment, neither of us could deny what was happening between us. The night felt heavy with possibility, the kind of stillness that makes every sound, every movement, and every glance feel magnified. We were sitting together on her small balcony, the city lights stretching below like a river of gold and silver. The hum of traffic and distant laughter was faint, but here, in this suspended space, it felt private, as if the world beyond these walls no longer mattered. She was quiet at first, shoulders relaxed but tension still lingering in the subtle lines of her posture. I could see the reflection of the street lights in her eyes, a shimmering mix of thoughtfulness and uncertainty. It was clear that she had been weighing the same questions I had, what this connection meant, whether it was safe to allow ourselves to step closer, and whether the pull between us was worth the risk. "You're different from anyone I've met," she said softly, voice carrying a mix of awe and hesitation. She looked at me carefully, as if searching my expression for a clue. "I keep thinking about you, about us, and I wonder if I'm ready for something like this." I swallowed, my chest tightening at the raw honesty in her words. "I feel the same," I admitted. "And I won't lie, it's dangerous. But it's real. And I don't want to walk away from it, if you're willing to take that risk with me." Her lips parted slightly, a breath caught somewhere between fear and anticipation. She turned her gaze to the city below, as though seeking answers in the lights, but her body angled slightly toward me. I noticed the subtle shift in her posture, leaning in ever so slightly, the faint warmth radiating from her shoulder. She wasn't moving away. She was testing herself, measuring the distance between curiosity and caution, and I could feel the tension tighten and release in rhythm with her uncertainty. I reached out slowly, tentative, my fingers brushing the edge of hers. She didn't pull back. Instead, her hand lifted slightly, meeting mine in a gesture that was delicate yet loaded with meaning. It was more than touch, it was acknowledgement, an unspoken promise that she, too, was ready to explore this fragile, electric connection. "I've been scared," she admitted quietly, eyes locking with mine again. "Scared of what this could mean, of how fast things could change, of losing control." Her voice faltered just slightly, revealing the vulnerability she rarely allowed anyone to see. "You don't have to be afraid with me," I said, my voice soft but steady. "I won't rush anything. I just want to be here, with you. Honestly. Fully. Nothing hidden." Her gaze softened, a subtle warmth spreading across her features. She exhaled slowly, letting some of her tension go, and leaned in just a fraction more. Our shoulders pressed together now, and the warmth of proximity was tangible, comforting yet thrilling. In that small space, vulnerability and courage intertwined, and the world outside the balcony seemed to disappear entirely. "I want this," she said finally, voice low but resolute. "I want to see where this curiosity leads, even if it's dangerous." A rush of relief and excitement surged through me. I reached out fully this time, letting my hand rest over hers, fingers entwining gently. She didn't hesitate. The contact was simple, deliberate, and full of meaning, an acknowledgement that we were both willing to step into the uncertainty, to embrace what had been building between us from the first glance. The night stretched on, quiet except for our breathing and the distant city sounds. We didn't need to fill the silence with words. The moment was already complete in its subtle intimacy. Her head tilted slightly toward mine, and I felt the trust, the tentative courage, and the quiet thrill of connection. Every glance, every brush of skin, every heartbeat spoke volumes about what we were beginning to explore together. For the first time, the hesitation that had defined our interactions began to dissolve. We were no longer just curious strangers dancing around danger. We were two people who had acknowledged the bond, embraced the risk, and allowed vulnerability to create intimacy. The turning point had arrived, and it felt both terrifying and liberating. By the time the night ended, we sat close, fingers still entwined, shoulders touching comfortably. There was no rush, no dramatic confession, just the quiet understanding that we had taken the first step together. Dangerous or not, curious or cautious, we had chosen each other, at least for this moment, and it was enough. In that suspended, intimate space, I realized something profound. The turning point wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was about honesty, vulnerability, and the willingness to risk everything for connection. And as I looked at her, eyes reflecting the city lights and the quiet intensity of the moment, I knew we were ready for whatever came next. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains, spilling across the room in warm, golden streams. The city outside was alive, but inside, everything felt calm, intimate, suspended in the delicate quiet that follows moments of deep emotional honesty. We had stayed up late the night before, talking, laughing, and letting the tension we had carefully navigated for weeks finally dissolve into something tangible, something real. She sat across from me at the small breakfast table, a mug of steaming coffee warming her hands. The way she held it, fingers curling gently around the cup, her shoulders relaxed, was a picture of quiet grace. Yet beneath that calm, I could see the lingering trace of excitement, the soft flush in her cheeks that betrayed the thrill of what we had shared. I felt a similar warmth in myself, a pulse of energy that was both thrilling and grounding. "I still can't believe we made it here," she said softly, voice carrying a mixture of wonder and disbelief. She met my eyes, and I saw a reflection of my own astonishment. The journey had been slow, careful, full of hesitation, curiosity, and subtle danger, but we had arrived. "Neither can I," I admitted, smiling. "It wasn't easy. But it was worth every step." She leaned forward slightly, the light catching the soft lines of her face, the graceful curve of her neck, and the way her eyes lingered on mine. There was a quiet vulnerability in her expression that made my chest tighten, a beautiful combination of confidence and openness, curiosity and trust. I reached across the table slowly, letting my fingers brush the back of her hand. She didn't pull away. Instead, she allowed the contact, her skin warm beneath mine, her eyes locking with mine in silent acknowledgement. The room was filled with small, tender gestures. A soft laugh as we shared an inside joke, the brush of her shoulder as she reached for her coffee, the way our knees touched beneath the table. Every movement was deliberate yet effortless, a reflection of the connection we had built over time. There was no rush, no need to force declarations. The intimacy was quiet, natural, and deeply satisfying. "I think I was afraid at first," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "Of what this could mean, of getting too close, of the age difference, of losing control." She paused, letting her words hang in the air. "But now, I feel like I've found something rare. Something worth risking." I squeezed her hand gently, feeling the warmth and sincerity of her touch. "I feel the same. You've made me more aware of what matters, more open to feeling, to connection. And I don't want to go back." A small smile spread across her face, one that was both playful and sincere. She tilted her head, letting her hair fall slightly across her shoulder. "Dangerous and curious," she murmured, echoing the words that had started it all. "We really are a dangerous combination, aren't we? Only if we let it be," I said softly. "But right now, it feels perfect." We lingered there, hands intertwined, savoring the quiet intimacy of the morning. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic proclamation, just a steady, mutual acknowledgement of the bond we had formed. Each touch, each glance, each soft smile carried the weight of weeks of careful exploration, hesitation, and slow-burning desire. It was the culmination of every subtle brush of skin, every lingering look, every moment of vulnerability we had shared. Eventually, she leaned slightly closer, resting her head briefly against my shoulder. I felt the warmth of her body, the soft rhythm of her breathing, the subtle heartbeat that seemed to synchronize with my own. It was an effortless closeness, comfortable and tender, a silent promise that we were choosing each other, moment by moment, without fear. The world outside continued in its usual rush, but inside, time felt suspended. Dangerous? Perhaps. Curious? Absolutely. But safe, too, in the way that matters most when two people finally allow themselves to trust, to connect, and to feel. As we sat there, sipping coffee, sharing small touches, and exchanging quiet smiles, it became clear that this was the resolution we had both been seeking. Not a dramatic ending, but a deeply satisfying one. We weren't rushing, we weren't forced into declarations. We had arrived at something real, something full of possibility, something that would continue to grow. And in that golden morning light, I realized the truth. Love, curiosity, and courage had guided us here. Dangerous? Yes. Worth it? Absolutely. Curious? Always. And together, we were ready to explore whatever came next, side by side, hand in hand, fully present, fully alive, and fully committed to the journey we had begun.